Hello everyone, this is Ian Schaefer here with UDA Technologies, and we are just about to dive into some of those key profitability features in the ConstructionSuite desktop software. Now today we're going to be working on one of our AWS cloud hosted servers. We're going to focus on the ConstructionSuite features that allow you guys to make more money in less time with a lot of the projects that you guys are setting up or going to contract with. Now we have a lot of attendees in today. I think we're actually a little higher than we normally are today. So we're going to take just a couple of minutes to make sure that everybody gets in, can see the screen, can hear us, can walk through all that. Basically, we're going to take a couple of minutes to make sure that everybody can find their seat, and then we'll be ready to get started shortly. So again, in the meantime, what I'd like you guys to do, those of you who have already made it in, take a look at the GoToWebinar panel. You should find an area on there marked questions, and while we are getting everybody in and settled, I'd like it if you guys would take a moment to open up that questions panel and tell us a little bit about yourselves, your company, what kind of construction you guys do, but most importantly, I'd love it if you guys could share with me what you hope to get out of our webinar today. Now we'll be getting started again in maybe 2 or 3 minutes, so just take this time to go find that. I'll also have my colleague Sydney answering questions for the webinar today, possibly Holly as well. And I have my colleague Jordan with me today in the webinar as one of our product specialists, and we'll be kind of bouncing questions back and forth as well. So I want to make sure that you guys are able to throw your questions in too, so that we can cover those as well. Again, area marked questions on the GoToWebinar panel. Pull it open for me. Tell us a little bit about what you guys want to see, and we'll be starting in probably 2 or 3 minutes. All right, thanks for your patience, everyone. Looks like we are ready to get started, and it actually looks, interestingly enough, like we have a very wide range of attendees today. We've got some residential builders, some commercial builders. Looks like we've got a couple of government contractors in today. New construction, repair, remodeling, renovation. Good mix, good mix. So happy to go over a lot of these estimating features with you guys today. Once again, to kind of recap, my name is Ian Schaefer. I'm one of the senior product specialists here at UDA Technologies. I also have with me my colleague Jordan Davis, one of our best product specialists here at the company as well. And today we're going to be taking a look at ConstructionSuite, coincidentally on the AWS cloud, but we'll be taking a look at ConstructionSuite and focusing primarily today on some of the estimating features to help us all make more money. So that means that a lot of these features that we're focusing on today are going to kind of revolve around markups and margins, tracking change orders, getting documents put together and reports and contracts, all of this critical information for setting ourselves up for success on projects. And we're going to start with one of the estimates that we have in the ConstructionSuite system. Now, real quick little snippet of background on this as well. UDA Technologies is a company, of course, we've been around for about 20 years now, getting close to 20 years, I believe. And at the moment, we are happily sitting with about 500,000 users, maybe a little bit more at this point, all across the world. We're covering, I think, almost 80 countries now, over 75 countries. And I've actually had the opportunity to set up some of our servers in very interesting locations for some of the people who are looking for cloud services. We've got some of them set up, a lot, of course, in the United States and Canada, covering a lot of our clients here. We've also got some set up in Australia, some out as far as Frankfurt, Germany, and several places in between. We've actually come online with one in Mumbai as well. So ultimately, this feature set that we're looking at today is no longer just a desktop software. Now some of these estimating features are going to be available to you wherever you go. Now, of course, this means that when you guys go on vacation, maybe you won't spend as much time away from the job, but you don't have to. Of course, you guys can enjoy your time. And today what we're looking at is just kind of fine-tuning some of those dollar amounts that you guys may want to be looking at while you're out and about. And so again, with this AWS server with ConstructionSuite here in the cloud, we'll be able to take a look at just that. I'm also very happy with the results that we've gotten from this as well. ConstructionSuite has been available for most of us now for 12 years, I believe. I think the first version came out in 2006, late 2006. And so ConstructionSuite has gone through an excellent evolution. And it has led to a lot of the things that we're going to take a look at today. We've refined this process, we've repeated it through a lot of feedback from some of you, our users, especially the guys who have been around for 10 plus years. We've taken the time to kind of refine some of the feature sets, touch up some of the templates that we're working with. And again, today, as we're focusing through it, we'll actually be taking a look primarily at an estimating at an estimate that was built on the residential estimating template, the residential master. And I'll go ahead and pull that up for us now, because again, all the big dollars are going to be coming from this guy and from how we organize this information. Now again, for those of you who just need a quick little pointer on how to get here, from the ConstructionSuite system, whenever you open up a job, any job will have a section here called Project Details, where most of you will see a link to create a new estimate on the first pass. You'll also notice over on the right-hand side, there's a quick link for a new estimate here. And over on the left-hand side in the navigation panel, you'll find an estimating section which has all of our estimate templates that are available. You'll also find on the estimating tab all of your own custom estimate templates that you want to create. So if you are creating your own estimates, or you want to model an estimate off of one of the ones that we provide with a little personalization or customization, this is the perfect place to go. Take a look under the estimating tab and you'll find an estimate templates section that shows all of the different templates available with brief little descriptions, and some of them also have a great little preview. Now within any of these estimates, of course, you can get to them easily, either from the project details by clicking on View Primary Estimate, or just click on the name of your estimate here and it'll pop open for you. And in ConstructionSuite 9, some of the newer versions of ConstructionSuite, the OnCost estimating system will open up for you and provide all the financials on any of these jobs, even if you're just building it as you go. What we're looking at right now is the project totals page for one of these estimates. The O'Connor residence, this is one of our custom homes. This is a brand new house. There's nothing on the lot right now. So as we're going through and taking a look at some of the information for this house, right now we're looking at primarily raw costs. So if we go into the planning category, for example, the design services section is going to show us how much money we're spending with our, I guess this would be the design company or the architects. That dollar amount, this $5,000, is how much we're paying for this area. And this is why the total cost in the total cost column over here is going to show that it costs us $5,000 to do this. We don't have any markups applied to it right now, but it's going to come to a total price to our customer of $5,000 for this individual line. Now, of course, we're in the industry because, well, for starters, I know most of you guys are exceptional at building homes or remodeling or building office spaces or whatever it is. Most of you are excellent creators. And this is where we can help you not only with the getting into the creation process part, but with also making a little bit of money while we're at it. Now, the very first place to take a look at this is when you're putting in these line items, there's an option here to apply a line item markup to some of these costs. Now, the idea with the line item markup, of course, is you've got a raw cost. You want to add a little bit of a markup to it to come up with a total price for your customer. Now, if you're going to do this line by line, the easy option is to go up to the View menu, go to Show Hide Columns, and scroll down in the list until you find the line item markup and dollar markup sections. Check these two boxes and click OK, and you'll have the two columns available for you to input those line item markups or dollar markups. At this point, all we need to do is just click into the cell, and it actually pops up the form where we can start to put the dollar amounts in. Now, when that form pops up, it's going to give you two primary options for how those numbers are going to be entered into the system. The first is going to be a percentage. Now, as we're going through and we're working with the line item markups themselves, the percentage markup that we apply is going to be generally just a blanket on the overall cost for the line itself. So if you wanted to increase this by, let's say, 20%, you could apply a 20% markup as a line item markup, a percentage markup, and it will include that here, give you the extra 20% here. It is a percent of costs. It's a markup. So 20% of $5,000 is going to be $1,000. It would show a $1,000 line item markup here, giving you a new total price of $6,000. Now, alternatively, we may want to work with a dollar markup instead. And it might be the same dollar markup. Maybe we put in $1,000 on top. Or for some of these areas, maybe we'll put in individual line items as well. Let's open up one here. So there's the percentage markup, of course. For a fixed dollar amount, this line item that we're looking at right now is just under $2,000. So if we wanted to make it an easy $2,000 or an even $2,000 rather, we could just put in a $160 markup, click OK. I see. It looks like in this case I selected all of the line items, but that's okay. But it just rounds it out to a nice $2,000. Now there's a couple of options on how you put these numbers together. Now, as I mentioned earlier, total cost is traditionally the cost that you pay, the markup then traditionally gets added in to come up with a total price to the client, but it looks like in this case, the markup is actually getting included as part of the total cost, which is an easy way to do things like track labor burden perhaps, or material waste, or subcontractor fees, or anything else that might be included as part of these costs. If you ever find that this is going to be a necessity for you, you can always help organize the numbers a little bit better, make it a little bit more intuitive by doing something like taking the total cost column and dragging it over so that it shows up after the markups. And this way it just kind of follows a natural flow. Quantity times cost plus markup gives you total cost. Total cost in this case, maybe plus taxes or something like that, might give us a total price. This makes a lot of sense for some of our Canadian users, some of the people up in, I've worked with a lot of clients up in the Northwest. I think you were talking about somebody in Portland the other day too, required to do the math this way to come up with those final dollar amounts. For us here in Alabama, however, we're going to change this around. We're going to set the total cost to be our raw cost plus markups as a profit. And the easy way to do that is to click back into the cell and go to Advanced. And from the Advanced section, there's a place under Taxes to choose how you want your taxes and markups calculated. I'm going to switch this to be Tax then Markup. And this will effectively give us a quantity times cost plus tax to give us a total cost. Total cost plus our markup amounts gives us a total price. And so you'll see that the total cost is going to go through and recalculate after a moment as we work. You'll also notice as you're going through and applying your markup amounts in here that if you're trying to get an individual line item markup into a section like the interest here, if you click into just this one section, it'll ask you how you would like to apply your markups for just this one line item, just one item. Now in this case, if we wanted to put in a markup for just the one item, we can easily apply a dollar amount in here. Again, if we're trying to round it out, maybe we put it in as $2,400 to give us a flat $15,000 here for interest. And there it is. If you click into the top item in any given subcategory, the first item in the subcategory, the first prompt is actually, do you want to apply this to everything in that subcategory? So instead of doing them one by one, if you're applying a markup percentage, perhaps, to everything in a subcategory, the quick and easy way is to just make the change in the first line. This is what happened up above when I was putting in the dollar amounts there. If we tried to put in a percentage markup here, it'll do the same thing. Just as you're working through this, keep in mind that this setting that we're changing right now applies to all line items in the subcategory, even interest where we've already put in a dollar amount. This will replace it. So if we click yes now and continue on, it'll allow us to replace whatever is in that space with a new value. Maybe it's a 20% markup or something along these lines. And so now you'll see that these all become 20%. It calculates for us the dollar markup that would be the resulting 20% of whatever the cost was to give us our new total price to the customer. Again, so we've got some easy options in this case to apply an individual line item markup or percentages for everything within a subcategory. And you'll also catch that if you are putting in those percentages or dollar amounts as you go, you'll notice for under fixed dollar amount that there's an option here to apply a markup per unit as well. This is extremely handy if you're doing something like 100, a quantity of 100, and you wanted to do $2 or $3 or $5 per unit in this case. That's handy again because you're working on dollar amount markups, but it's not a fixed dollar amount, so it fluctuates based on the quantity that's required.
Ian, I wanted to jump in at this point. A lot of the tools you've shown so far, or a lot of the options you've shown so far, are really effective to speed up your process a bit if you know for a fact that you want to go ahead and apply a blanket 20% markup to this construction financing subcategory. Well, you can do that instead of having to enter 20, enter over and over again. I'll tell you, Ian, though, some of my clients that I've worked with have asked, well, we want to apply a blanket markup to all of our materials. Is there a way to do that? And so I'm going to ask you, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Jordan, as well, because the answer to that is absolutely yes. Now, what you guys will notice as we're looking through the estimate itself, there's a classification column on the left. This particular estimate that I'm working on is what we refer to as a standard estimate. Every line has its own individual cost, and you choose what classification applies to that cost here. On the planning category, which is the one that we're working on right now, most of this would be classified as other costs. But as you start to dive into sections like foundation or framing or windows and doors, you'll notice that we start to break up into things like labor or materials. And if you're working with some of the cost books, you may remember that a lot of the cost book items are also broken down by these classifications as well: material costs, labor costs, and so on. Now, an easy way to catch all of these by classification is to actually come back up to the estimating section and click the Set Classification Markups button here. This covers you in this case, Jordan. Using this option or using this feature, you can actually go through and predefine how much you want to apply as a markup percentage to each individual classification type, no matter how it gets in there. Which means, again, if we're going to go through and use a full markup for all materials, let's say it's a 10% material markup to cover the cost of waste. We just want to put in that markup to make sure that we're covered. Maybe a labor burden we're going to use in here as well. We'll put that in as like a 60% or a 70% or something along those lines. Subcontractor fees, let's say 20% for the guy who forgot to do his insurance. This should cover us on that, I hope. And so on through. As we click OK now, it's going to go through and apply those percentages throughout the entire estimate. Everything that has the classification gets these markups or percentages, as long as the link is unbroken. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But it just kind of goes through and predefines all these markups. Now again, if we're going through RS Means cost books, or your own custom cost books for that matter, and you find a material item that you need to apply into the estimate itself, you insert the item, it gets inserted as a material item here, cost comes through, it automatically gets that line item markup that you've set as the classification markup. That's all done ahead of time. So that information would become available and pre-populated in here based on that classification, and all of it gets preloaded. You don't have to remember all the bits and pieces, and it's all taken care of. Now, I mentioned the linking because you'll notice that when we go into and try to assign a line item markup, actually let's do it for the second item. As you go through and you click the option, it's going to alert you that the item that we're trying to change is currently linked to the material classification. Its value is being populated by the material classification, and if we decide to change this individual line, it's going to break that link. It's going to sever the connection. So we can say yes at this point, and we can put in a unique material markup, or a unique markup for this one individual line, or at this point we can actually cancel because I want to maintain that connection. Now you'll also catch, when you go back to the classification markup section, there's a couple of buttons down here at the bottom to reconnect everything. Either all items or specific classification. You can choose your classification here and then click link items with that classification, or you can click link items within a selected area. This might just be a section of the categories or subcategories or what have you. So as you work through this, you'll be able to put together a lot of this information and reconnect everything just in case something got broken or something got separated once upon a time. If somebody did go in and start customizing a lot of your markups and you just wanted to do a blanket reset, use these options down at the bottom under your classification markups, and they'll keep you covered in this case. Now, I did see one of the questions actually come through regarding sales tax and if that works in a similar way. And kind of yes, kind of no. As you're looking through this, you'll notice that there's also a taxes tab up here at the top. Taxes for the United States are typically broken into a materials tax and a service tax. These are tax rates that would apply to various different things. We don't predefine these tax rates or try to pre-connect them to anything coming out of cost books or classifications, because again, with the materials tax type, depending on your region in the United States, the materials might apply to it will typically apply to materials. Sometimes the material tax is already included though, so maybe tax included is going to come up instead. Sometimes material tax applies. Sometimes the material type here for taxes also shows up on subcontractor fees if they're applying materials. Sometimes it shows up on equipment. Service fees typically show up on labor, sometimes other, sometimes material if there's a delivery involved. And because this happens a lot, we don't try to predefine that. So instead, there's a tax drop-down menu as well that you can get to from the View menu that allows you to preload that, or there should be a setting in the cost book that does it as well. Now, these are all inline markups. As you're going through and figuring out a lot of this information, you'll find that you can apply an individual line item markup, or you can set classification markups, and all of this information comes together to give you a total price that your customer is going to pay per line. So you'll always be able to see this, and if we step back to the project totals page, you'll find these total prices here. And again, as you're looking through this information, it kind of tells the story of how much you need to make in order to cover all of your costs and build in your profits. When you generate reports, all of that information comes up as well, and it really works to your benefit to keep all of this information together.
This has been some great tools that you've shown off so far, Ian. I want to follow up with another common question that I've heard from my clients in the past and our clients. It's a slightly interesting question. I'm sure you're going to dig into it a bit and really talk about some of the meaning programmed into it, but a common way that I've heard this asked is, what if I want to mark up everything in my estimate? I just want to mark up everything. I want to make sure that I take the cost that I have, and I'm making sure that we're really putting markups across the board into the contract total.
Yeah, and I see what you're building towards in this case, because of course some of us do work with classification markups. We put in the markups, we might do 20% or 50% or whatever it is for everything to get the same markups across the board. That's a possibility, but there's a better way. And in this case, that better way is found at the bottom of the estimate on the project totals page in the company overhead and margin category. Now, the company overhead and margin category is designed to provide exactly what you've asked for. The company overhead and margin covers a percentage markup or margin for your overhead expenses. It gives you a percentage for your profit margin. It can keep you covered for your contingency. You've even got a couple of extra sections in here so that you can build in other things. Maybe you like to have the insurance show up down here at the bottom instead of being built into where I have it in the planning category. So if you want to rearrange this information, you've got these options available to you here. And they're great options because in this case, all you need to do is apply a percentage in this column for this particular section, and it'll do that calculation for you. In this case, it's 10% to cover our company overhead expenses, or whatever it is, what I would refer to typically as everything below the line. And when you're looking at the project totals, basically what we're looking at is, here's the line. Everything above the line is going to be what your accountant might refer to as your cost of goods sold traditionally. This is all of the raw costs. When you start talking about gross profit, it's everything from the company overhead margin down. So the below the line section, company overhead margin, is going to be your operating expenses. It's going to be your target numbers for profit. It's going to cover your salaried employees and your time, Jordan, for, if you're running a construction company, your stuff will be in there. Maybe it includes the fleet of trucks that the company owns. All of that gets built into the overhead, and you'll figure out what that percentage needs to be and apply it in the company overhead and margin section here. Now, I don't know about you, Jordan, but I have the question coming up all the time of what percentages should we use? As much as I would love to be able to point out exactly what those numbers are, it's going to differ based on your area, based on the numbers that you guys are going to be able to sell at. But my rough rule of thumb or rough guide has always been about a 20% margin for most new construction companies, and somewhere between 35 and 40 for most like remodeling or renovation companies. Most of these numbers, by the way, have come from our partnerships with organizations like Remodelers Advantage, who push or heavily recommend that you shoot for or target a 30 to 35% margin on all of your jobs. Companies like NAHB might recommend something for new home builders like, again, 15 to 20%. I find a lot of commercial projects tend to have, like especially big commercial projects, tend to have slightly smaller margins, because everything is just on a bigger, much more expensive scale. So the cost of materials is much, much higher. You might have like a $7 or $8 million hotel that takes twice as long as one of these jobs, but doesn't require as much of your internal time. So you don't have as much of an overhead expense for it. So again, It changes. It varies depending on the type of work that you guys do, but this is a great place to go in there and put it in. And it's also a great place to go in and kind of manipulate the numbers a little bit as well. So you can always come into this section and put them in. Now, Jordan, you actually, I was going over to talk to you, I think it was yesterday, and you were on the phone talking with somebody about the difference between markup and margin. Could you recap that for everybody? Because you'll notice in this case, in the company overhead and margin section, there is an option to switch between the two. There's a percent margin and a percent of costs. And I think based on your discussion, you were just talking about where that percentage comes into play. Like, what is this 10% of?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I find that people start asking things like, well, there's a lot of the same use of the word margin on this page. What does it mean? What about markup, right? How do these things come into play? Really, these two options here between percent margin and percent of costs, you're really telling the system or the estimate where it's going to apply this percentage to. And you were building towards that somewhat. Looking here at the percent margin option, this percentage is actually applied as part of the project total. So what we're telling ConstructionSuite in simplified terms here is that we want the total price for company overhead percentage to be 10% of our project total, no matter what that project total is. And so,
yep, there's our number right up here.
Yeah,
here's the one that he's talking about, and that's exactly right. You guys, I've had this discussion with a lot of people too over the years, and I'm glad to hear that the people are still asking about it and calling in about it. My rough rule of thumb, though, is when you're looking at these numbers, of course, at the top of the company overhead margin sheet or on the project totals page, this little section, it gives you the number that it's calculating off of if you're using percent of costs, which is generally used for cost plus projects. Now, a cost plus project is, I mean, again, these are the contracts that you're signing with your customers. If you're entering into a cost plus project, you'll give them a rough idea on how much it's going to cost. But when you're charging them, it costs what it costs plus your percentage. And the percent of costs gives you exactly that. Now, for those of us working on fixed fee contracts, which I find to be an overwhelming majority, the fixed fee contracts tend to give you the option to set aside a portion of that contract amount, and that percentage that we were looking at for the percent margin is exactly that. Now again, your accountant is going to know exactly what this means, because when you're talking to your accountant, if they say that you've got a 30% gross profit, that means 70% of the money that you guys are bringing in for revenue goes to the cost of the job, the other 30% goes to your company. In this case, we're running as if we had a 20% gross profit, which means that this 445 number represents 80% of the contract, and these numbers add up to 20% of the contract. And that's why they have a 10 and a 10 for your percentages, and they go from there. Now, a couple of quick points on this. I've seen a couple of people mention this already. Some companies do apply an inline markup, a dollar markup up above, and then further compound that with the markups from the company overhead and margin. Again, as a rough idea, or I've mentioned this a few times so far, I like the idea of using the line item markups to cover things like labor burden. You can say in the estimate that you pay $25 an hour for one of your field staff. That $25 an hour is the number that he makes. That's what you cut him on his check. It says $25 an hour. From there, of course, we take out the taxes and everything like that. But it doesn't cover the cost of his uniform or his insurance or his workman's comp or training expenses or ongoing education. All of that would get built in as that margin. And if you figure out your margin percentage, you can put his hourly rate, add in your margin, and that gives you a closer to true cost, which might be something like $40 an hour for this guy. So it's an easy way to put that in. Overhead and margin, the company overhead and margin category sheet, does calculate on the total price, which means that the markup is going to be factored in. If you're using line item markups in addition to the company overhead and margin, it does calculate that into it. You'll also notice that the margin percentage, or when we're calculating with a percent margin, if you add in some additional dollar amounts down in the company overhead and margin section, this 10%, for example, will go up if we apply an additional 5% here for the contingency, because it has to maintain 10% of the overall contract value. So it's important that we keep these things in mind as we're putting in these numbers. You always want to make sure that you have the right set. Again, 10% of the contract value right now which is almost $600,000, would be almost $60,000. If we change this to percent of costs, now it's just 10% of the $445,000. So now it's $44,500. Percent margin will always be higher. My rough rule of thumb is 10% margin is 11.1 repeating percent of costs, 20% margin is 25% of costs, and so on up. 50% margin is just doubling the cost of the job, literally 100% of cost. So again, as you're working with those numbers, trying to feel the right fit, adjust them, see what you come up with. Now, along these lines, we did encounter somebody working with the company overhead margin the other day, trying to put in a discount item as well. Now, this is fine. You can absolutely put in negative dollar amounts in here. I recommend using the second line, though, for any of these subcategories. The second line is actually designed to be a fixed dollar amount. So where you've got a percent margin or a percent of costs for your first line, the second line is always open to put in a dollar amount in the same cell. So if we wanted to offer a $5,000 credit here. Let's make it a negative $5,000 so that the system knows it's a credit. You can do this. That $5,000 becomes a credit. It lowers the overall contract amount and everything like that. You can even come into and rename this discounts if you'd like. Discounts. And maybe this is issuing a discount for the design fee or something along those lines. These are easy options that you can apply in there as well. Just keep in mind that it doesn't matter where you put these items. If they're in the company overhead margin category sheet, it all factors on itself. It builds on itself. So all of this information is going to come together. And as you're providing this detail for your customers, of course, there's a number of different ways that it's going to show. Now, the best part about this is in ConstructionSuite in the estimates, once you come up with your numbers, whatever it is that you need to see, the reports section allows you to pull all of this detail out of the estimate and put it into something presentable. Some of you like talking about spreadsheets. I'm a numbers guy. I love spreadsheets. I have never had success giving a spreadsheet to somebody who doesn't do spreadsheets and talking them through it. Yeah, we'll get there eventually, but it's a much easier pitch if we provide them something that's, good on the important details and light on all of the supporting information. So along those lines, we give you the proposal wizard. Now, from this proposal wizard, you can take all of these markup numbers that we've put together so far and make them presentable. You know your customers, you know who you're talking to, and along those lines, you'll be able to go through the proposal wizard and customize the information in a number of different ways to provide them exactly what they need. So as we go through and take a look, again, this is for a custom home, so we're going to use one of the residential templates in this case. As we move through the various different options, one of the first pages, who are we presenting to and what's the address information for the house? You can apply these things here. Just click into the cell if you need to add somebody else, and you can. Under the next screen, you have 6 different residential templates to choose from. If you need to customize the templates, there's the Edit Template option under each of these, but more importantly, they give you a rough idea on these layouts, and then you can label them according to the type of job that you're doing or using for this presentation. So you could set up 6 different styles of presentation depending on who you're working with. From here, as we go on to the next screen, again, scope of work, special conditions. If you included them in the project creation process, they'll show up here. If you need to add them now, you can. Check the box, type in the information that you'd like to include, and press on. You'll also notice some of the additional details here, like do we include options as a separate section? If you're using options in the estimate, absolutely, have at. Same for allowances. You can include the markups in allowances as well, although I never do. And then from here, it's just going to give you an overall job amount as well, pulled from the estimate dollar amount here. There's also a space for dimensions. If you guys didn't catch that dimensions webinar the other day, I highly recommend you go back to YouTube and go find it. It was spectacular. Of course, I helped to host it, so of course I would say so. But biases aside, it describes some of the benefit of using these dimensions. And in this case, they're great talking points. So I'll include those as well. And here is where we get to the real meat of the proposal itself. This is where we get to select how much information shows up on the proposal and how that information breaks up. Now again, there's a lot of options, a lot of checkboxes available to us here. And as you go through and select the right sections or the right options here, the the system will remember those selections so that they can give you the same results every time if that's what you want. Otherwise, you can come into and customize them as you go. Now, for markups, the inline markups are going to show as part of the price. You have the option here to put that in as part of the price, so make sure that you check the box. If you're using sales tax as well, again, all three of these should be checked. Here's how much it costs us, plus the tax that we have to spend, plus whatever markups in line that we're going to apply. These are the line item markups, and that gives us a total cost. Now there's a section up top to include the company overhead margin as well. By default, I believe it selects as a separate line item. This is not my favorite. I actually prefer to use the option to prorate into the categories to take this overhead and margin dollar figure, this $141,000, and spread it proportionally across everything else in the estimate. I prefer this because then we don't have to have that difficult discussion with the customer where we have to try to justify that our work is worth what we charge. It is. We've been in business for a long time, so we know that it is. And rather than trying to get them in this mindset of I could go out and buy all the parts and pieces and destroy my home all on my own, we'll just go ahead and factor this into the cost and make sure that we're presenting them something a little bit more readily palatable, I'll say. Now, of course, you'll have some other options down here as well, including notes if you've got them. We can also include subtotals, or we can check the box to hide subtotals in here. I want my subtotals included, but I don't want to show the individual subcategory costs, so I'll use that. We don't need line items or anything like that. So again, this is my perfect set. So we'll click Next again and Finish, where it will generate the proposal for us, and from here we can do those last little touch-ups like adding the letterhead or logos or whatever we want to include, and then we can send it on from there. Insert, letterhead, perfect. Eagle Rock Construction. I'm sure every single one of you has seen this before. That's our sample letterhead. But it gets the job done. Again, it shows you where all of this information comes in. There's our dimensions, there's a total brace price. Again, here's some of the notes for some of the various different sections, and again, some of the total costs and everything like that. Now, once again, brief reminder, as we're looking at the estimate summary, if you wanted to compare, we can expand the category totals and see here what the total value for each of these categories would be. As we're looking at the proposal, you'll notice that there are differences between these numbers, and that's a direct result of prorating the company overhead and margin. Framing, for example, in this case, is $25,000 more. Well, that makes sense. $80,000 plus a 25% margin is going to be about that. As you go down exterior windows and doors, you'll notice the same. Some sections aren't going to be as impacted because, again, I didn't select to include my markups with my allowances. This may fit well for some of you. Others may want to change this a little bit too before you provide the information. So again, this is a quick and easy way to put the dollar amounts together for the proposals, build those markups into the proposal itself to send out, and then from here you could generate contracts for this information as well. Those, by the way, can all be emailed out directly. All you have to do is go to the page layout screen, and you'll actually find the email as attachment button. This will send it out as a PDF. So if you ever need to do that, you've got the PDF option. From the file menu, you can export as a PDF again or a Word document. You'll also be able to go from the file menu and save it to ConstructionOnline as well, if you like. And you'll be able to put together some of the additional detail from there. Now, I think one of the last things that we were talking about, and the final bullet point that I want to make sure that we cover with you guys today, is changes to these contracts. Now, of course, we've all dealt with change orders, God knows how many times. Some of us don't get hit very hard. Others, I've seen companies who run sometimes as many as 200 or 300 change orders on a project about this size. It all heavily depends on your customer, and from what I can tell, the contract is only good up until you show up at the job site to break ground. At that point, the change orders could start at any moment, and change orders in ConstructionSuite are available to provide a lot of the detail of the breakdown for your customers so they can see what they're getting into. The owner of our company, when he was running a construction company, he loved to talk about the little things. And it could be something simple like, you know, he's working on a kitchen and the owner comes in and looks around at the kitchen and almost everything is done in the kitchen. You know, the countertops are in there, the sink is installed, and they're standing there where they plan on cutting up all the vegetables or hooking up the mixer, and the outlet is a little bit further away than they thought it would be. And so they said to our owner, Michael, well, I mean, since you guys are still here, can I get you to just move the outlet over, 3 or 4 feet? That'd be great. That's easy enough to do, right? Without thinking about what that might include. Now, of course, we know what goes on behind the wall. We know that the sheetrock is there, but behind that, you've got, studs and 2x4s and whatever holding the wall together. So moving it 3 or 4 feet could actually be an expensive job. And that's always how he would prevent it. He'd say, I'm happy to put together the information for a change order to do that. I'll send it over to you shortly, and we'll make sure that it's the right decision, that you really want to do this. So then he would. At that point, we'd come back to the estimate in ConstructionSuite, take a look at the project totals page, and start figuring out where these pieces are going to impact. Now, of course, if we're moving an outlet, might be a relatively simple thing, but part of that is going to be cutting out the existing one. Now, along those lines, if we're going to be cutting out the outlet, we're probably going to be going into insulation and drywall. So we're going to have to cut a new hole, and we're going to have to replace the old hole. So maybe we've got drywall materials and maybe a little bit of labor that goes into this. So let's just say here we're going to start our change order with drywall, and I'm just going to right click and select add change order. Now this will be change order number 1. I know, wildly unrealistic that we got this far and are only now hitting our first change order, but so it goes. So we'll put in change order 1. The name of this is going to be move an outlet. And we're going to move it, let's just say 5 feet for argument's sake. Moving outlet 5 feet to the right, or whatever it might be. Obviously, the description that you apply here is going to show up on things like change order contracts or the proposal that you send over to the customer. So, again, try to keep the vulgarity low no matter how much it ticks you off. Content for your customer high. On the next page, all of these change orders are going to start off pending unless you're working, again, a cost plus project. If it is cost plus, I still recommend putting together the change orders. It's a scope change. Even if the change order costs nothing, I still recommend putting together the change order contract just to have it written that the scope of the project did change. Maybe the customer originally wanted some neutral tone for the paint in their walls, and then they came in one day in a mood where they wanted everything painted hot pink. Get that documented, get that signed, and that way you guys don't have to worry about the fallout later when they see it and change their mind. Or maybe there's another change order to come back and change it back. But ultimately, all of this documentation is going to take place here. And as you go through, you can build the content on this page. So from here, we know the drywall materials is going to be part of the change order, but we don't want to convert the subcategory. This is part of the contract, so we're just going to leave this box unchecked. That way it will create a new subcategory that looks exactly the same. We're also going to hit the plus sign now to the left of this because we're going to add in another section. This is for electrical. Under electrical, there's going to be a new segment of labor. There's probably going to be some electrical materials as well. Let's see if we have some additional options in there. Electrical systems. Well, let's just go with miscellaneous for wiring for now. What else do we have? I'm sure there's other things in here as well, but we'll just go for this for now. So we've got drywall materials, labor, wiring. We'll go next. And this will actually start to put together some of our subcategories. Now the drywall materials, I'm just going to keep this one simple. We're going to go with a lump sum, and we're going to say that to have the guy come out and cut the hole, patch up the old hole, do whatever it is that he's going to do, it's just going to cost $50 for the visit. Right now it's got a 10% markup on it for materials. I'm going to actually change this to a 25% markup. That's what I like to apply for my change orders, so I want to make sure that that gets included as well. Now over on the right, now that we have the change order in place, you'll actually find a new change orders subsection here in the estimate summary. This is important because this acts as a hyperlink to the next section of the change order. So we've got drywall materials set up. Now if we go over to moving the outlet, for the labor, we're going to have to do a fair amount of work in this case. Now I'm still going to set it as lump sum, but maybe our electrician has a flat $200 cost just to move the outlet, because he's got to turn off various things and ground it out, move the wiring and everything like that. Whatever it is, this is his flat rate. So we can apply that in there as well. Click on Move Outlet again. This will take us to, after labor, there should be miscellaneous. Again, materials. Let's just say for argument's sake that this is going to be another $100. And there we go. And so now we have a $400 change order. Now, it's important to note at this case that I'm looking at the line item markup every time, because this is how to apply the markups for your change orders. Change orders in ConstructionSuite estimates require that you put in a line item markup or create an additional subsection, typically at the end of your estimate, to track markups or sometimes builder's fees or whatever you like to call them for your estimates, or for your change orders rather. So again, if you're working with these, you have those two options. I highly recommend using the line item markups, because that way you're factoring all of your change order markups into the process. It's here on the page while you're entering the numbers, no chance to forget. So if that's part of your process or part of your workflow, then you're accounting for everything as you go. Now, of course, once you do this, you put the change order together. Next comes the proposal. So in this case, we can go to File, Save the Estimate. This will commit any of the change order information that we've put in there so far. And now we can go to the Reports tab. Under Customer Reports, you'll find Change Order Documents. The Change Order Document section includes things like an itemized proposal for the first change order, moving the outlet in the kitchen. Here's a brief outline for what it includes. Here's the description that we applied. And here's the information that's going to show up in the proposal itself. If you want the table, you can check the boxes here to get the table. If you just want the dollar amount, then you don't have to include the table itself. Otherwise, OK will generate this. Again, all of the information is going to be available for you here with a somewhat simplified breakdown as you're going through and taking a look. And again, they're very customizable templates. So if you need to go into and insert a letterhead, obviously that's an easy option. I don't have a dedicated customer for this project, so again, we'll go into the document wizard in this case to make sure that we've selected somebody. Or better yet, since this is the second or third time that I've done this, since it happened more than once, now might be a great time to go back to the project in ConstructionSuite and finish setting the client for the job. Since I haven't done that yet, we'll just go ahead and select Jack, get him into the contract, get everything set up. And once again, from here, we can send it out as an email attachment, upload it to ConstructionOnline, print it, export it as a PDF, whatever you need to do. All the information is going to be here. One thing that I do heavily recommend, though, is when you're looking at any of the contracts in ConstructionSuite, you'll find that blue text sometimes means auto-populating fields. Like here, you can see the little pop-up there to represent it. Sometimes it means just something that you need to pay attention to, like, does this change order impact the schedule? Is it going to take longer to do? Or is this a quick and easy one? If it does have a scheduled impact, again, in this case, we've got the additional time of however many days, 1 day, will be added to the project completion due to the so on and so forth. If you look down at the bottom, there's some options for you to come in and apply things like a signature line like you might in the proposals or something like that. Although the change order contract is generally where you'll want to see that. This is just an easy way to kind of propose it to them, and then once again, email it, print it, ship it off, however you want to work with it. The question has come up a couple of times for AWS users, anybody who's working with a cloud-hosted system. If we do choose to print from here, it'll actually pick up all the printers that I have connected to my local computer. So from here, this print option would give us a PDF creator. It'll give us the in-office printers that we have here. I think we've got an HP and a Canon and a Xerox, and honestly, last time I checked, it seemed like we had one of everything. But as you go through and you work with all these different options and everything like that, even from a cloud-hosted environment, you'll still be able to get all this information together and use it from wherever you need it, and put the information together, the details together to get those change orders out. Or for some of you using ConstructionOnline, you can also take this proposal, upload it to ConstructionOnline. Under the Estimating tab, you can view change orders, and from here you can also upload an individual change order to ConstructionOnline as well. Just select the one that you'd like to upload and select the button down here to upload to ConstructionOnline, and it'll take this detail that you've put together with the change order name, the description, the total cost for your customer, all of that gets uploaded to ConstructionOnline as well, where your customer could then go into their client portal and approve it from there. Or even better still, you can pull it up while you're talking to them, pull it up on the app, the ConstructionOnline app, approve on their behalf, and it'll request a signature for them, so you can just hand it off to them. They can sign on the dotted box. They can sign on the box provided, and that's their way of approving the change order with you there. So again, all of this information is easily or readily made available to your customers as you guys are working through it. And with all of this documentation and the detail and the depth, you'll never have to worry about not making money. Now it's just a question of how much do you want. Now that, and again, that's topic for another time. But for now, I think we've covered most of these questions. We are going to pause for a couple of moments so that I can just do a quick recap. I see a couple of green flags in here for questions that I think Sydney wanted us to cover. I'll make sure that they were. But again, if you guys are kind of working through any additional questions or anything else comes up, please, by all means, go ahead and send those questions in to us. We'll make sure that we field those questions as we go. There looks like there's some that are actually a little bit more company specific as well, which is great. We're happy to provide any additional insight or guidance that we may have, having worked with, in some of our cases, tens of thousands of construction companies, so we've seen a lot of what works. We're happy to share this. For most of you, though, if it is company specific, just give us a call or reach out to us via email. For those of you using ConstructionSuite already, you can find our contact information in the Help menu under Contact Information, surprisingly enough. And all the information that you need to reach us by phone or email or fax or whatever you guys want to use, it's all going to be available for you right here. So reach out to us and we're happy to answer those questions. For now, though, we're going to pause for a couple of minutes. For those of you who are happy with what we've worked on so far, at this point, we'll let you go. You guys can go and have the rest of your afternoon. Don't forget to join us, though, next week on Thursday as we dive into the next in this series of ConstructionSuite profitability webinars. I believe next week we're focusing on time. So making sure that your team shows up to the right place at the right time. So scheduling is going to be a big piece. To-dos, calendar activities, and things like this, they're going to be huge. And if I don't talk to you guys before then, I want to thank you again for joining us this afternoon for our Estimating Profitability webinar. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon. But until then, guys, have a great weekend and take care. So I did notice one important question from somebody that came through a little bit earlier in the webinar that I unfortunately seem to have blown by. The question about how markups show up in various different reports. And that's a great question because we actually chop it up depending on the style of report that you're looking at and where you're putting the information. For example, if you're looking at the Reports tab in the estimate and you open up the vendor reports, most of these vendor reports will not by default include markups of any kind. Purchase orders, subcontractor contracts, material lists, most of these are tracking your raw costs. So it'll be either the extended cost, your quantity times unit cost, or the total cost, which is again traditionally quantity times cost plus tax. Those are the numbers that show up on most of these. Now the RFQ is a little different. Request for quote is designed to go out and get their numbers to put into your estimates. So of course for the RFQ, most of the information is actually going to be left blank so that they can fill in the blanks themselves. No sense in sending them the dollar amount that you're willing to pay to see if they'll do it for that. Let them say how much they can do it for, and then you guys can figure out who's providing the best prices. Now, some of the other reports, again, most of the customer reports and proposals do by default include markups because, again, these are forward-facing things. We want to make sure that the customer is seeing the total price. For the project management reports, again, we're looking at maybe a 50-50 split. So some of these, like the project totals reports and the over budget reports and the remaining balance reports, do by default include markups because a lot of those are things like, for remaining balance, I believe this one's going to be estimate versus invoiced. And so you want to make sure that you're comparing the invoice to your customer against the total that they're going to pay. Think of this one as being kind of similar to the AIA G702 and G703 forms, which also, by the way, include the markups in inline unless you choose to separate the company overhead margin. So if you're using QuickBooks and you're going through the QuickBooks integration, App for Pay does also include line item markups and company overhead margin, assuming that you select it when it goes.
think this is a good segue, and another question came up towards the end of the regular webinar. They were asking about the application for payments module and how change orders come into play on that, potentially.
Yeah, also a great question, and ultimately it's got a couple of possibilities. This is one of those interesting ones that I usually change how I describe it depending on the company that I'm working with for a number of reasons. The design of the form, G703, the application for payment, or the schedule of values, or whatever you like to call it, the design of the form and the intent is that change orders get factored into the existing line item where they apply. Like in this case, right now we're looking at electrical miscellaneous. If we had a contract amount for electrical miscellaneous and change order to electrical miscellaneous, they get combined for the application for payment. This is how G703 was designed. The scheduled value is supposed to show the total overall for that section, but then again, it's also designed with the CSI codes in mind. I think now we're supposed to be on a 50, but it's been changed a few times since 2004, so now it's like a 57 division structure or whatever it is. But that was the original intent. For those of you who do want to keep them separated, it can be done. Just make sure that you create an additional change orders category down at the bottom, and that way when you're sending it over to QuickBooks, QuickBooks knows that this is a completely separate section. When it gets added to the app for payment, the app for payment will put it into a separate section as well. Now granted, again, a little off topic here, but if you are working with QuickBooks, I highly recommend numbering your categories using a 2-digit number system. Planning would become O1 planning. Foundation would become O2 foundation, or O3 if you do demolition. Demolition might be O2, and so on. So change orders might be division 99 or 99 space change orders, with the idea there being that QuickBooks is going to try to alphabetize everything. In this case, we're trying to force QuickBooks to put them all in numerical order instead, which it will do, and that way we can control how the information shows up, which I love. So again, great questions in that case for the app for pay, and we will continue going in this case. A few more questions, I believe. Here's a detailed one. I use a double allocation for overhead expense. 1% for labor plus burden, and another for everything else. Can this be done? Can the program accommodate? Yes. This would be what I would consider to be a pretty classic example of needing to use the classification markup instead of the company overhead margin. You can figure it out, but if you've got different markups for different sections, line item or classification based markups are the way to go instead of using the global markup, which doesn't care what the different classifications or sections are. Next question, would you use one of the other overhead and margin lines to add for the labor? Again, it's not, the company overhead margin doesn't care about the classifications. It's not giving you a breakdown. It's literally a blind overall markup for the section in there. So great questions. And again, in this case, what I would recommend doing is just finding those things and applying them as inline markups based on a classification instead of trying to have it done elsewhere. That way you can also automate it as you go, which saves you a ton of time putting together proposals later as well. All right, and I think that's all that we had flagged for today. If I've missed any questions, I apologize, but if you do have anything else that you'd like to bring up to us, by all means, give us a call. As we mentioned, you can always reach us here in the office. Just open up the help menu and you'll find all of our contact information available here with all the phone numbers to reach us at. I recommend using the 800 numbers here if applicable. The other numbers will also take you into our office as well. Some of them might call through a Skype service, or we've got a number of other phone services as well. But if you have the option, the 800 number is always going to be best. So give us a call and shoot us an email, whatever you guys would like to do to reach out about this, and we're happy to talk. Otherwise, once again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys about making money, some of our favorite topics, and hopefully we'll talk to you again real soon. Until then, everyone, have a wonderful afternoon and a great weekend. Take care.